assignment, I've decided to read the book Freakonomics by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner, and today I will be giving you a review of the book, in my opinion. So, first of all, I really enjoyed the book Freakonomics, and it taught me a lot about not just settling for the easy answer, and to think beyond the conventional way of thinking. It also taught me that not everything is just X and Y, and that they're all related. You have to think that there could be a greater thing that caused both things to happen. And it also taught me that, the smallest of things can cause the greatest of reactions and cause us to do things certain ways. Now, in regards to recommending this book, I would love everyone to read this book because I found it to be very interesting. Because when I first picked it up, I was like, oh, economics, that might be kind of boring, but when I got into it, I really enjoyed it. So, first of all, you have to consider there's a lot of controversial and offensive topics considered in the book, and not everyone may agree, and it may cause some anger, because over the years this book has had a lot of discussions and blogs and everything about it, because there's so much talk to be had about all the things that are discussed in the book, and which makes it great. However, at the same time, it can be offensive. Also, it may not be interesting to all. However, I found it to be incredibly interesting because it made me think of things that in a way that I never probably would have thought of otherwise. And also, you have to be very interested in data and facts and history, because throughout the book they use it to support every idea and thought that they have. So, going into the book, they start out and they begin to describe what is economics. Because in order to go through the process of reading this book, you have to understand what economics is. And the authors describe it as why we do things the way we do them. So, what is Freakonomics? Because the authors also define Freakonomics as their own special study, as Freakonomics being the way of thinking beyond conventional thinking, going beyond what is accepted, and finding the correct answer, what is right and what is really going on when we do things the way we do them. The question becomes, if economics is why we do things the way they do them, then why? What is the cause of the reason for things that we do? Well, the authors in this book do a stellar job of describing that the reason we do things is because of incentives. We have moral, economic, and social incentives, which I'll get into a lot more later on. But in a general sense, you have your moral incentives, which are you saying to yourself, I will do this because it's right, or you'll not do it because it's wrong. Your social incentives are you saying you'll do something because of, yes, this will cause my peers to look at me in a positive way, or no, I won't do it because this will make my peers look at me in a negative way. And then you have your economic incentives, which say, okay, this will get me paid, I'll do it, or okay, this won't get me paid, I won't do it, or this will get me fired. Chapter 1 of Freakonomics, it's very interesting because it starts out with a subtopic or a subtitle, which is a very interesting question, which is, what do teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? So the author starts it off by asking a very interesting question, which gets you intrigued and wanting to find out, well, what is the similarity? And both of the authors do an excellent job of describing the moral and economic and social incentives that teachers and sumo wrestlers both have that are common, in which both cases they describe that sumo wrestlers and teachers cheat. For teachers, they were describing that teachers would cheat in the classroom on high-ranked tests, and they would want to give students correct answers, so first of all, that the school would not shut down and that they wouldn't get fired, as well as them getting a higher pay raise, because in California for a short time, teachers were getting significant pay raises if their students did well on high-scoring tests. So there was a high economic incentive for teachers to cheat. However, that outweighed the moral incentive to not cheat and to be fired. However, once teachers were being discovered and fired for cheating, the moral incentive got raised and the economic became lower. And it also lowered a significant amount when the economic incentive of the pay raised was taken away as well. Then, when you shift to the sumo wrestlers, they were also have said to have cheated, which is not a for sure case. However, it is very much so suspected that sumo wrestlers do cheat. Now, every 2 months, sumo wrestlers, the highest ranked in Japan, have wrestling tournaments. And the higher ranked sumo wrestlers have more luxuries than those of the lower ranked. They get higher pay and special treatment, unlike the lower ranked ones. So their wrestling matches are called bouts, and if you have a record of winning at least 8 bouts, then you are for sure to have a higher pay raise. So the reason that they were saying that these wrestlers were cheating is that they were allowing each other to win so that they would both get paid. In this case, it would work if there was an 8-6 wrestler going against a 7-7 wrestler. Now, the authors show a statistic that says that in this case, the 8-6 wrestler should have a slightly higher % chance of winning over the 7-7 wrestler. However, when compared to actual statistics of this relation happening, the wrestler with the 7-7 record has a 79% chance of winning that wrestling bout. This was because they believe that wrestlers are making deals with each other to let the 7-7 wrestler win so that they both have at least 8 winning bouts, which means that both of them get paid. So this was the economic incentive to cheat. However, in Japan, wrestling is a sacred sport, and it's seen as a sacred sport. So when people are talking about sumo wrestlers possibly cheating, it is very offensive, and so that is the moral incentive for them not to cheat. But in this case, they're saying, the authors have described that the cheating being an economic incentive outweigh the moral incentive if they're not getting caught. So in Chapter 2 of Freakonomics, the authors begin with an obscene subtitle, which was, what is the similarities between the Ku Klux Klan and real estate agents? Now, again, it really gets you interested. Oh, well, what is this really about? What do they have in common, if they do have anything in common? So basically what the authors review throughout this chapter is that both the Ku Klux Klan and real estate agents withheld information and still withhold information from us to get what they want. In the case of the Ku Klux Klan, it was a group of very conservative people who believed in certain things, and anyone who didn't follow their beliefs, they wanted to tear it down, they wanted to make sure that it was never heard, and they wanted to basically stuff it back down their throats. So they try to get their point across by lynchings, killings, and doing obscene, racist, horrible things. And the incentive behind listening to them was one of the most intense feelings or emotions that you can make a person have, which is fear. They withheld that fear against people because they didn't know. They didn't know what the Klan was actually doing or what they could do. Now, you may say, but they were very violent. The Ku Klux Klan was very violent. They caused many deaths. They did so many lynchings. But when you look at the data of lynchings, years before the Ku Klux Klan had began lynchings, there was many more. And when the Ku Klux Klan got it added into that average, there was actually less. So it's not that they weren't doing much more than we already were doing that was bad. It's just that it was intensified and it was publicized and people saw it in the public eye and it was scary. So it was a social incentive to listen to them because they were scary. You didn't know what could happen if you didn't listen. Now, with a real estate agent, they are experts. They know what they're doing. They understand how to sell a home at the best price and what is the most beneficial and easiest way for them to get things done. Now, for an average person like myself, it'll only be it may be 3-4 times that I may have a home where I have a transaction where I'm selling a home. So I'm not as experienced as an agent on the topic of knowing how to sell my home at the best price. So I'm depending on that agent to be upfront and honest with me and let me know what are the things that I can do or how much I can really sell my home for. But the thing is, what is driving them to want to give me the best deal? What if they don't have that incentive? What if they don't have the moral incentive to say, let me help this person get the best deal that they possibly can? Well, statistics show and data shows that if I'm selling a house for $300,000 and I'm trying to sell it for $10,000 more, the agent only gets $150 more if I get $10,000 more from selling that home. In that case, it's not an economic incentive for that agent to want to help me reach that. However, if it's them that's trying to sell their own home, they will make sure that they go out of the way to get that extra money. Wouldn't you? It makes sense. It's an economic incentive for them to want to save the time and the money for themselves. And it's also important that they're not wasting their time. So in this case, both experts, the Ku Klux Klan and the real estate agents, were using their advantages to get what they wanted by lying or withholding information.
Don't you think that it's boring how people talk? Make you smile with the words you get. Well, I'm bored. Because I'm doing this for the thrill.
Chapter 3 of Freakonomics, the authors begin with an obscene subtopic or title, which was, why do drug dealers still live with their moms? Now, this wasn't the main focus of this chapter so much as the drug dealing industry was. So it begins with talking about a college student who wanted to do a report on the life of a poor African American. So he decided he wanted to go around and ask a questionnaire, and one of the questions on his questionnaire was, what does it feel like to be a poor African American? Now, this is a question that I would consider to be offensive in many cases, and it would probably not end up well if you asked this question. I personally wouldn't. Nonetheless, he did it. He went to a neighborhood where he felt like he could get answers, and when he arrived, he found that most of the buildings were abandoned. But he didn't end his search. He went to discover on the 6th floor of one of these buildings there was a gang. And in this gang, he decided that he was going to try to ask his questionnaire questions, and they were very offended by that first question that I mentioned. And he was held there for at least 24 hours. During this 24 hours, he learned some very interesting things about gangs. In a gang, there's a leader, and that leader is basically the one that kind of keeps the peace in the group and kind of makes sure that they don't get into severe fights with other gangs. And then there are the foot soldiers, or the dealers, which are the ones that are actually selling the drugs. Now, he also learned that the foot soldiers don't get paid a whole lot. So they usually had an alternate job, or they would try to have their leader help them get what they considered a good job, which sometimes was being a janitor. Now, this is where the incentive comes into play. Where was the incentive for them to want to be a foot soldier? Well, the hope was that they would move up the ladder and become a higher ranked person in the drug industry, because as you moved up the ladder as a dealer and a leader, you would get paid more and more, because the leader of a group got paid a significantly higher amount than a foot soldier did. So the idea was that you moved up in ranks, and if you weren't going to move up, then you would just drop being a dealer altogether. The authors of the book also mentioned that being a foot soldier also meant that you had a 1 in 4 chance of getting shot by members of another gang. So there's a lot of risk in this business. The question you may ask is, where is the moral incentive of these drug dealers to say, oh, well, selling drugs is illegal, it's bad, it's wrong? Well, the thing is, most of these drug dealers were brought up from not very good homes or a good environment as young children, so they usually ended up selling drugs. The places that they grew up, the authors refer to them as the projects, and most of the time there was no real moral to not sell drugs, because the punishments or the incentives to do so or to not sell drugs was not there, because going to jail was not seen as the biggest issue, because right after you got out you went right back to it, because the industry was so large. It's not like it can just be gone overnight. It can always come back, and the foot soldiers would just come back and keep doing it. Different note, the authors also use a very interesting comparison with a study that they found that was done in Israel on different daycares. Now, in these daycares, they were doing a study to see kids being picked up late by their parents. Over a 5-week period, they discovered at these daycares, on average, 8 kids were being picked up late a week. So after these 5 weeks, they put into place a fee that you have to pay if you came to pick up your kid late. It was a $3 fee, so it wasn't very much. They were hoping for a good result, meaning that parents would start coming in picking up their kids on time so the teachers could leave. However, it was the complete opposite effect. It actually caused the parents to leave their kids late more often, and they were coming late more and more often. The reason was that there was originally a moral incentive to say, okay, I need to come pick up my kids so that these teachers can leave. Now, since these teachers had removed that moral incentive and replaced it with an economic incentive that said you were going to pay $3, it removed that guilt at not a very high cost. So by not putting into place an equal yet opposite incentive, the result is not going to be what you're seeking. Basically the same thing that was happening with drug dealers. The incentive of going to jail was not that high because you weren't going to be there for that long, and you could just go back out on the streets. Whereas the same thing with the daycare, you just had to pay a fee while you could still be playing tennis or something, and then come pick up your kid late. Moving on to Chapter 4 of Freakonomics, this section of the book was giving a slightly more intriguing but interesting title, which was Where Have All the Criminals Gone? Because it really gets you to wonder, it was like, oh, well, where is this going? So in this section of the book, it's talking about all the crime rates that were going on in the 90s. And during the 90s, there was tons of crime. There was homicide, there was rape, there was gun shootings and robbery, and tons of other things that were going on all at the same time. So they were trying to figure out, what are we going to do as a nation, because if this continues, it's just going to skyrocket, and it's just going to be a bloodbath for the generations to come, and we're just going to be raising generations of criminals. So they had already predicted that this was going to happen over the 90s and that it was just going to keep getting worse and worse. However, towards the 90s, when they looked at the statistics and they looked back at it, they realized that it started taking a deep fall. It went, and it was crazy because no one expected crime to fall as quickly and as hard as it did. But the thing is, people couldn't wrap their minds around why. Now, mind you, the focus of the authors in this portion of the book is not so much about incentives for crime as it was about the conventional thinking that went through trying to wrap your mind around why crime went down. Most people just accepted the idea that it was better police force, there's more gun control, or anything that they could conjure up to make sense, because they just wanted to believe that one thing was going to be the cause of another. And it had to be things that were recently going on because there was gun control laws put into place. And there were several different views about gun laws, and there still are, and it's still a very controversial topic. Some people believe if everyone had a gun, which is something that they actually do in Switzerland, and it works very well, they believe that if everyone has a gun, then you're more likely to be safe. Because the theory is that there's a strong man and there's a weak man. Obviously, if there's nothing else involved except for the strong man and the weak man, the strong man is going to win. But what if the weak man has a gun? That changes the story. That changes the defense. It changes what you have available. Or say there's a criminal trying to rob a woman. If the woman has a gun and the criminal is aware that everyone has a concealed carry, they are less likely to approach the woman. At least, that's the theory. However, when you look at it statistically, if everyone had a gun in the United States, it would only lower crime 1%. So, why does gun control matter so much in that respect? What if no one had a gun? And people view it like this. But the thing is, if you take back into consideration the comparison of a strong man and a weak man, who's going to win? The strong man. So again, in that situation, if no one had a gun, that as well would only lower it 1%. So, if you think of it this way, gun control is not really that relevant to crime. Now, you take into consideration the police forces. Yes, they were getting better, but you have to think there has to be something else. What can cause such a significant drop in crime? Authors of Freakonomics bring to light a very interesting idea as to why crime dropped so much in the 90s. So basically what happened is during the 70s there was the Roe versus Wade case, and this was about abortion. And Jane Roe was a woman, she was about in her 20s, and she was about to have her third child. She had put the other two up for adoption, and she wanted to have an abortion instead of having the third. She was an alcoholic and a druggie her whole life, and she just didn't want to have to deal with a third child. But she was from Texas, and during the time it was illegal to have an abortion in Texas. So they went to court, and there was a huge case about it, which was the Roe versus Wade case. Now, by the time when the case was over, she had already had the child, and she had put it up for adoption, and by the end, even though she won the case, she became pro-life. Very, very interesting. Nonetheless, it was about abortion, and by allowing more abortion in America, they believed, the two authors believed, that this was a very valid reason for crime to drop, because studies show that children born into families with one mother or an unstable home, or having divorced parents, not having equal parenting, having a mother that beats them or a father that beats them, does drugs, drinks, just does very unparental, very bad example kind of stuff. They are 100% more likely to commit crime than someone from a stable home that has a good education and has things going for them in their life. That's just my favorite thing about this book, that the authors of the book abandoned the most conventional and common way of thinking to just look at things in a simple light and to just not question things so much just to say, oh, well, this makes sense, I'm going to go with it. No, they go farther than that, and they try to understand things for really what they are, to make sense of things that don't make sense, that we just go along with. And I just really liked that.
It's all get like yeah.
I could go on and on all day, but moving on to chapter 5, which was also very interesting. It was titled, What Makes a Perfect Parent? So I found this really interesting because it talks about how there's obsessive parents, and then there's kind of laid-back parents that don't really care too much about what their kids are doing, and about the early stages of parenthood. So when you look up things about how to raise your children, there's everyone who has a different opinion. There's like, oh, well, most of the growth is done during the first month that the child is born, or during the first 2 years, or no, during the first 3 years of the child's life. It varies. No one knows for sure because everyone thinks differently. Everyone thinks it's something else. Now, again, this section of the book doesn't focus so much on the incentives of economics, but it focuses more on the conventional thinking that goes into things, and how we cannot just accept what seems easiest to understand. So both of the authors put together so beautifully used regression analysis and correlation to help us understand what makes a perfect parent. So the authors have chosen to use, in regards to how well a child does in school, to determine a perfect parent. So some factors that have been studied include the child has highly educated parents, the child's parents have high socioeconomic status, the child's mother was 30 or older at the time of her first child's birth, the child has low birth weight, the child's parents speak English in the home, the child is adopted, the child's parents are involved in the PTA, the child has many books in their home, the child's family is intact, the child's parents recently moved into a better neighborhood, the child's mother didn't work between birth and kindergarten, the child attends Head Start, the child's parents regularly take them to museums, the child is regularly spanked, the child frequently watches TV, the child's parents read to them every night. Now, these are all factors that were taken into consideration when you're talking about what makes a perfect parent when it comes to the child's education and how well they do in life after they finish school. In the book, both of the authors go into gross detail about all of these factors. However, I'll leave that to you to read about because it's so much, and it's very interesting how they talk about each topic. Now, the first 9 factors that I listed, if you can notice that they are more so how a parent would influence their child. It's not so much stuff that they're doing to them as the remaining 8 factors are that don't really affect your child. So there's a clear difference because the first few represent how a parent would influence their child. The remaining 8 are how a parent would actually treat their child or try to teach them how to do things. So if you're trying to become a perfect parent, you want to try to influence your child in the most positive way that you can by giving them all the tools that they can to succeed. And that also includes how you act, how you decide to do things. Are you setting a good example? Because that's the most important thing, and that's the most important thing that comes down to when you're considering being a perfect parent in the eyes of giving your child a great education.
I was scared of dentists and the dark. I was scared of pretty girls and starting conversations. All my friends
Janiqua, Latoya, LaQuisha, LaKeisha, Latomia, Rohadra, Bonquisha, Shatanya, Depromination, LaQuishria, Bonifa, Shataniana, Lavondia, Bufanaquishria, LaQuisha Niqua, Bobisha.
Moving on to the sixth and final chapter of Freakonomics. In this chapter, the authors discuss the differences in giving your child names.
Girl, Qualifria, Quisha, Niqua, Cambrisha, Congratulations, Barakisha, Obama Niqua, Kool-Aid Drip, SpongeBob Bishia.
Chapter 6, the authors both incorporated a ton of statistics and information, which you could kind of get lost in it sometimes, because they include information about the most popular white names, most popular black names, names that parents that are of high economic status give their children, and what parents of low economic status give their children. And it's very interesting because they try to show you the correlation between the two. In some cases, it ended up being that the names ranked on the high economic status lists that were at the bottom of the list were at the top of the low economic names list. So what they're basically trying to say is that the names that low economic people give to their children, they try to give based off of what they see high economic people giving their children. So basically what happens is these names become used over and over and over, that they get worn out, and that once the high economic status people see that lower status economic people are starting to use those names, that they need to start generating new and different names, which are supposed to be a representative of the high economic status that that child's supposed to have. And it's just a continuous cycle of these trending names. And the thing that interests me is I'm trying to figure out, well, maybe this trend can be applied to other things besides names. And this was not related to the book, but that was just an independent thought that I had.
Andrea, set your phone equal, United States of America equal, Alejandrisha, King Kong Quisha, Fried Chicken Nisha, Collard Green equal, Grape Drink Isha, African Nisha equal, Kashida, the Tanyana Bobanatria equal Nicolis, Courtney.
So that was Freakonomics. Now, I don't know if you got as much out of it as me talking, but I know that you get so much more out of it by reading the book. It has opened my mind to new ideas and new ways of thinking, and I just know that I really appreciated the fact that I read the book, and it really taught me a lot more about economics, and I really would recommend you read it.